Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Roy Reid, author and trust leadership expert, co-author of the Transformation and Evidence-Based Training Program, as well as book, and both of which teach people how to improve results by improving relationships through a more intentional focus on earning, building, and restoring trust. Welcome to the show, Roy.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show, Roy. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll be talking about trust and leadership. In this backdrop, we'll have our conversation. But before that, let's understand a bit more about you, your background, your journey, and also perhaps your near-death experience, which brought you at this point in time. So I want to understand all that for the audience so that they know who they are listening to.
Well, I appreciate that. My journey is an interesting one. I have about 34 years in communications and marketing background. And was really inspired to start looking at trust when I was a partner in a public relations firm, and really wanted people to understand, particularly my clients, why it was so important that the outcome of all of our communication should be to build trust, that it should always improve with the things that we're doing. And so I started to unpack the idea around trust, what it was, how it worked, what were some of the key things that people could do to make an impact on it, and really started to see trust not just as one big sweeping idea, but as a series of small things that happen on a day-to-day basis that we do and that we pour into on a regular basis to build it up. My journey took me from the agency to the University of Central Florida College of Business, where I continued to foster these ideas and work with some other leaders to understand some of the things and some of the reasons behind trust and how it works. And then in 2016, I was recruited to go to work at Advent Health, which is one of the United States' largest healthcare systems. And while there, I partnered with a physician, Dr. Amara Mansfield, and the education and training team to develop the Trust Transformation, which is an evidence-based training program that we were designing for the leaders on the front line, the nurses, the doctors, and others, to really employ trust at a higher level in the work that they were doing. We launched the program then. I'd say about 7,000 people have gone through it to date. And following the really few years that we tracked the results, Dr. Mansfield and I wrote and published a book that was released in November of 2024. So just a month and a half ago, we've published the book. And the results that we've seen are amazing. You asked about my health issue. In May of 2019, just a few years after we launched the program, I suffered what's called an acute aortic dissection. If listeners aren't familiar with that, it's not a heart attack. My heart literally was split open and had to be rushed into surgery. Surgery took 6 hours. They had to replace the entire upper arch of my aorta. And statistically speaking, this situation only has about a 2 to 5% survival rate. And the way my story weaves into this is I really had to learn to trust at a whole different level after that. And the rewarding part of that journey, past surviving, was really learning trust at a whole different level, trusting myself to do and live my life in a better place, trusting others around me, and really understanding, where I had not done trust well in my life before. And so today, my full-time work is to be a coach and a trainer to help leaders and organizations really understand those ideas about trust. And when we trust ourselves first better, we can trust others better. We make better decisions. Our lives are built on a greater sense of integrity in the things that we do. And it's through that consistency that our relationships improve. And when our relationships improve, everything improves.
Absolutely, absolutely, Roy, and thank you for your story. That's why you call yours a living miracle, and for others also, if they understand the medical part of it, then obviously this God is great, and that is why He keeps on making these miracles. Individuals, they have to understand how they are using that life, and others also can learn from
Yes,
such
sir.
life. We'll try and learn from you as much as possible. Now, when you talk of trust,
Hmm.
trust is part of, the if I call it from my side, the way I understand it, it's embedded in our very being. It's embedded in everything the universe does. We may not trust one ourselves for 1 second, but we still know that the sun is going to rise tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Tell us then, how does this trust work from the way you want to explain it to us?
I love that question because we begin to open up so much more when we really open up our hearts and minds to understand that trust is not one big thing. It's a lot of things. And first, the thing we teach is that trust is built on two big drivers. One is emotion, and the other is experience. So when we think about the relationships that we have in our lives, there's a high degree of emotion attached to the people that we trust the most, and but it's over time that that trust is really solidified and turned into something meaningful that we can apply in our lives and in the work that we do with other people. And then we take it one more step and look at trust through the lens of what we call the four attributes of transformational trust. And those four attributes fit within the framework of emotion and experience. And it starts with the attribute of being trustworthy. The goal in our lives is to be trusted. Trustworthy is congratulations, you've earned the right to be trusted. And within even that attribute of trust, there are indicators that are at work, building our ability to be more trustworthy. Things like our integrity, our attitude. Integrity is adhering to a set of principles and ideas, a moral center and a compass that guides our thoughts and our beliefs. And then our attitude, which sounds like it might be on the other end of the spectrum, is so important in that because that really defines the first impression that people have with us. And it's the one thing on any given day that we have control of. And so it's within that framework of trustworthiness, again, that we find integrity, we find attitude, focus. Are we doing the right thing right now? Initiative. Are we taking action on things? So that's the attribute of trustworthiness. Up the emotional side of the scale is the idea of being authentic, having real, meaningful relationships with people. And we achieve that when we have clarity of what the relationship looks like, when we give respect to people in all circumstances, when we are able to speak candidly in a relationship and even offer forgiveness even to ourselves. And so having that authenticity is a big connector with people. And then along the plane of the experiential side is being dependable. There's a guiding principle with this that says that we're going to keep our promises and communicate consistently. Even as good as any of us are, we're human. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to fail. And so, as we strive to keep that promise, if we're communicating with the other person consistently, we can help manage the expectations when mistakes are made, when issues happen, when we have to apologize and say, "Hey, I'm sorry. It's not going to get there today." That person still has the faith in us, the trust in us to figure it out. And then the last of the four attributes is influence. And it's really the gift of trust. And when we think about leadership, leadership is influence. And people of influence really go out of their way to do something special with trust, to make trust something that they do in service to other people. And so people of influence, they make a choice to get engaged. They confront the good, the bad, and the ugly, and they're not afraid to deal with the things when they come up. And most of all, they have the courage to start things that are important and even finish the work when it's done. And so those four attributes make that framework of trust up. in the trust transformation.
Absolutely. We'll come to the book, we'll come to the program also, Roy. But first, to understand, you see, we are talking about trust, we are talking about leadership, both the things together, because it tells us that there is no love lost, no trust there. I
Right.
want to understand then that how can, with so much of trust already being eroded, or have been eroded,
Mhm.
can you give me one factor why it has been eroded? And how do you build it up after it has been eroded to that extent that has
Mhm.
led to the great resignation and quiet quitting? Is it an easy job? Is it a one person's job? How do you start building it back? Do you demolish the whole building or you go for restructuring? Because the corporate leaders' restructuring is leading to a lot of mistrust.
Mm. It's a great question, and it's one that every leader should struggle with. And really, I think that's the first step. And what we talk about in the book and the training program and the driving principle is that you need to be intentional about this, and you need to be mindful about it. It needs to be front and top of mind. Oftentimes, what happens is we break trust without even realizing it. I tell a story in the book, and when I deliver a keynote or a speech. Um, I have 4 kids. I have 3 sons and a daughter. My daughter's the youngest of the 4, and if you're a father of a daughter, you know that there's kind of a special connection in that relationship. And years ago, she's 22 now, so she's in college and making her way at that. But when she was 5 years old, she had turned our living room pretty regularly into a bracelet factory. And that can be a dangerous thing when those get on the floor and under your feet. But she made a bracelet for me, and she asked me if I would wear it, and I told her I would. And it was a holiday weekend, and so we went out to a variety of different places. We went to the mall, we went to the movies, and everywhere we went, I would show and tell for my daughter. Come the end of the weekend, I had to get up and go to work. And you might remember back in the day where people had to put a suit and tie on to go to work every day.
Right.
And so I'd put my suit on, I put the bracelet on the dresser and went off to work. When I got home that night, Faith was still making bracelets. My wife and I are working in the kitchen, and she comes in and she's got another bracelet. And I think to myself, I've only got so much arm to give to your cause. And she says, Daddy, if you didn't like the other bracelet, will you wear this one? And as a father, that's a pretty devastating moment, because in her limited view of life, when she saw that bracelet on my dresser, she thought the only reason I'm not wearing is that I don't like it. And that wasn't true. But I went and I put it on. And every day when I leave the house now, I put that bracelet on when I head out, and I wear it every day. And I wear it for 2 reasons. One is I told her I would. And 2, it reminds me, and the takeaway that I'd love listeners to walk out with this is every little thing that I say or do is either contributing to or taking away from the trust that people have in me. And so you ask the question, what can change? What can make a difference? How do we shift our culture, our society into that place when leaders take an intentional view and take responsibility for this? It can change and transform an organization. And I'll give you a good example. One of the first the first big organization that adopted this was Advent Health, where I worked for 10 years. Just a few years ago, they had acquired a hospital system in a different market, and the CEO went in there and said, "Hey, we want to start off on the right foot." So Dr. Mansfield and I went down and trained his leadership team. Now, this was a hospital that had terrible numbers. So they were in the lowest 25% when it came to customer satisfaction, and the lowest 5% when it came to clinical outcomes, and particularly hospital-based infections. A year after the training, this and adopting what we call a trust contract, which is, goes alongside of their mission, vision, and values, the CEO came to visit me. And within 1 year, they had flipped from the lowest 25% to the top 75% in customer patient satisfaction, and they had gone from the lowest 5% to the top 95% in hospital-based infections, and they had gone 6 months with zero. And I asked him, I said, Tim, how do you attribute this to what we did? And he said, simply, Roy, trust changes everything. When trust is high, everything works better. People are not afraid to speak out. People are looking out for each other. People are looking at the systems better, and they're taking that responsibility for their actions and really leaning into how they can help and support others. And so it really happens one person at a time, one person making that decision and saying, I'm going to put trust first and go and build and create something really special.
Absolutely, absolutely, Roy. So within an organization, a leader will think, listen, at home, I am very much trusted. My wife trusts me, my children trust me. But as soon as I enter the office, I see not even the security guard is trusting me. He has the eyes of all my employees. Why is it so? The leader might be confused. He's a nice person, he or she is a nice person.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know why it's like that. Why does it happen?
Everyone comes to the table with a different background and different experience. What we've been through in the last 5 years is really put a difficult situation into the relationship mix. There's a great research study done every year by Edelman, one of the largest public relations firms in the world, called the Trust Barometer. And I cite a study for that from 2020 to 2022. That their main takeaway was that distrust has become a default in the human emotion. So when we think about that for a minute, it means that when you come into contact with someone for the very first time, you're behind. You've got more work to do than maybe prior to that. But your analogy of the home and the work situation is a good one too, because we're with our families from the beginning of life on, right? So you've got a lifetime to build that up, and that consistent and engaged relationship shows up every day. And yet when we step into the workplace, we make the assumption that because things are good in one space, they'll just automatically be good in the other. And like I said, everybody shows up with different traumatic experiences. Everyone shows up with different backgrounds. And the person that maybe you have been asked to lead, that you're meeting for the first time, is just coming out of a situation where they had a terrible boss, where they were berated all the time, where they were beat down. And so they show up and they're defensive, and they're questioning, and they don't know. And if you just come rolling in with your ideas, and you just come rolling in and you don't take a step back and listen and exercise empathy and really seek to understand, as Stephen Covey puts in his 7 habits, seek first to understand, then be understood. You're going to find it's a much harder road and a much more difficult ability to build trust. And so the expectation should be, I've got some work to do. The expectation should be, I'm going to earn it. I'm not just going to assume it. And when you do that, it's going to come at a lot better and more fulfilling way.
Right. Let's look at it this way. Is it that our present times force our leaders to lie to us? Earlier on, without all these things, the industries were there, the companies were there, say 20 years, 25 years earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
No CCTVs were there. No, not this sort of a micromanagement was also there. Still work was getting there, and the leaders were still trusted better than today. Is it that our expectations of our leaders have grown differently? Or is it that the leaders have started looking at themselves differently? Or is it that these are not leaders, they are just pretenders to the throne? What would you say?
I love that last one, because we do see a lot of that. I think a lot of things have happened. And first and foremost, we live in a much more transparent world than we ever have before. And so it's much easier for, say, an employee or employees to see behind the curtain. and know when they're being lied to. It's much, you think back in history, and even in big moments, there were times where information could be hid from the public, and leaders, political or corporate or otherwise, could just move forward with it, and nobody was the wiser. Today, there are many more ways people can find out what the truth is, and we see much more clearly into the operations of organizations, or behind, where people are living, even in a social media world. Your life is on display on a variety of basis, and it comes through, and people can see that, and then ask the question, well, why are you living this way in one place and living a completely different life in other places? And I will tell you that when I went through what I did with my heart issue, and began to confront how was Roy living his life, I was failing in some areas of trust. I was failing in areas of relationships, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But for me, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it brought to life, and it really brought to a new level an awareness of where I was not being the father or the dad or the coworker or the boss that I should be, and really put me on a better track to live out the thing that I had been telling people about for 10 years at that point. And so it really does come down to that awareness, and recognizing that you're on public display all the time. You are not in a place where you can say one thing and do another. People are going to find out. And as corporate leaders, as people who are in a managerial position, the more we can be transparent and intentional about building those trusting relationships on the front end, the farther we're going to go in a much more meaningful way.
Right, right. One more question, Roy, and then we'll come to the book. Is that, within a corporate environment, does a company culture build trust, or is it that trust builds a company culture? How do you see it?
The chicken and the egg question. It comes down to the leadership, and the way they engage with their people creates the foundation for how a culture is formed. And so you see this all the time with organizations that go through big leadership changes, right? And you'll have a CEO that has a long and storied career at leading an organization, and how that organization forms this great, big, trusting culture, because of the way that influence trickles through the organization. The expectations are set, and then their replacement comes in, and they crash and burn because it's not the priority. And so it always begins with the leader. It always begins with that person who's going to say, we're going to be an organization that prioritizes the relationships. We're going to be an organization that's intentional about how we build trust, and how we restore trust when we fail. And sometimes it's those companies that go through a recovery period through a tragic or traumatic event, that have a stronger brand going forward. Trust is it's the cornerstone of brand. Brand is simply the promise delivered, right? I mean, you buy products based on the fact that they consistently deliver on that promise, and that you feel safe when you do that. And safety is really perhaps the highest expression of trust.
Absolutely. And now let's come to your book, The Trust Transformation. You have written along, you are the co-author of this book, and you have also also the name of the evidence-based training program. Tell us a bit about both of them. Who are these programs? Those people who have lost their trust, or those people who want to, how do you want to put it?
Listen, it's both. It's people who have gone through and maybe need to reevaluate how trust exists in their organization. But I tell you, it's exciting when people come to you that already have a high trust organization, and they really want to put this in as a means of catapulting it to that whole new level. And so the training program really came first in its native state. It's a 4-hour program. We'll come in and work with the leadership team, and the outcome of the training is to develop what I mentioned earlier, and that is a trust contract. So you think about it as an agreement that you're making with your leadership team, and then within the organization, that you're going to prioritize your relationships. You're going to do so by focusing on and building trust in those relationships. And so while all of them look different and unique to each organization, think about it as, say, 10 to 12 principles that they're agreeing to, and literally signing it and saying this is how we're going to move forward. And so that contract becomes both a point of inspiration for how they want and aspire to behave, but also a point of accountability, that when something's going wrong, the first question you ask is, have I adhered to the principles and ideas that we agreed to in our trust contract? And then the book has come as a result of both the training program that's been in play at Advent Health since 2017, and then the companies that I've worked with going as far back as 2015 that have implemented it. And so in the book, you're going to find all of what we've talked about, and opening up and providing the roadmap for how to build, restore, cultivate, and really flourish in trusting relationships. But then there's some case studies, everything from corporate examples to small business examples to community service organization examples, where people have brought these principles in, adhered, and lived by them, and really seen a transformation in their results.
Absolutely. There's much to understand about these things from you, Roy. And I'm sure a lot of people would want to understand these things, especially the serious ones who may be very trustworthy but do not know how to be their authentic self, especially within the organizations. So be that as it may, a lot of people who would want to connect with you, because the sense of trust and mistrust can be seen in the happenings. Very recently, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but the United Healthcare and all these things. We want to give a better message to the people, our customers, our consumers, our stakeholders. That's why I say, be that as it may, for those people who would want to get to know more about you, about your book, about your training program, what's the best way for them to do so?
I'd say my website's a great place to start, roywreid.com. I'm also on most social media platforms. LinkedIn in particular is an easy way to find me. I'm pretty active out there, and I would look forward to having a conversation with anyone in a leadership role about how they can transform their organization.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.